This is the continued meeting of last week. So I have been asked, I'm going to start with this. I've been asked to read this. It is, this says a small amount of housekeeping has been added to all meetings that are being recorded to assist Severn Trent with preparing the minutes. Number 1, will each member do a mic check? Please keep the red button on the mic in the up position. When the red button is depressed, the mic is muted. Please do not mute your mic. Please complete request to address form located in the back and give to the district manager. I don't think we have anybody here today that'll need to do that. And I'm supposed to take a roll call. Mr. Tinkle is here.
Here.
Mr. Guy.
He's here.
Mrs. Flaherty.
Here.
And myself, Mrs. Feinberg, the chairperson, is here. Please turn off all your cellular devices. And lastly, the trash receptacle is near the exit. Please be respectful as the boardroom is shared workspace. All right, I've done that. Okay, with that, we will go to the Pledge of the Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And I don't believe we did have anybody that wanted to speak on these items. Is that correct?
Correct.
Just wanted to verify that. Tony, I'll let you take over.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. If you would, I heard some beeps on the phone. Could we find out who was on the phone?
Danny is here. Anybody besides Danny?
Stephen Agapi with Tetra Tech.
Okay.
David Lapidus, are you there yet?
Apparently not.
Let's see here. Let's just, if you bear with me, Madam Chairman, let me make sure David calls in.
Okay.
Are we good?
Please call in. He was going to, and I think Diane sent him the call-in information. We're here today, it's a continuation of the hearing of the board meeting of April 20th. And it's the items that were agenda items 6C1 and 2 with regards to the consideration of adopting an engineer's report, adopting a master assessment methodology, which includes a preliminary assessment role, consideration of setting a hearing date, time, and location for the consideration of adoption of a final assessment role and sitting as a board of equalization, all relating to the Lake Bank restoration project. And I appreciate the board's indulgence. The meeting, which was continued until today, based upon some reviews that was performed, particularly, and we appreciate the assistance of Mr. Tinkle, there were some questions with regards to the allocation of EAUs or equivalent assessment units to various business, office, commercial, residential, and other properties other than residential, everything other than residential. During the period between the last board meeting and today, the numbers were updated, revised, cross-checked, re-cross-checked by Mr. Tinkle, Mr. Bloom, Ms. Moore of Severn Trent, and Russ Wire, who's your assessment methodology consultant. And what we provided to you yesterday is the updated revised master assessment methodology report with the date of April 25th. Hey, David Lapidus, is that you?
If it is.
Thank you, David. We've already started. Is the master...
Sorry for being late.
No, thank you for appearing. Is the master assessment methodology report dated April 25th, 2017. And as indicated in my cover memorandum of April 12th for last week's meeting, which was continued until today, there are two versions of the engineer's report and two versions of the master assessment methodology report. And the differences between the two are the number of the scope and size of the project and the cost of the project and the dollars associated with the funding and financing associated with, I'll call it the one engineer's report and assessment methodology, which reflects an amount to be financed of $12.5 million. And the alternative plan for the amount to be financed for the project scope of $20 million. And what I'd like to do with the chair and the board's indulgence is have Danny briefly run you through how we prepared the engineer's report and answer any questions Danny may have about the engineer's report. Just in general, once again, Danny, when you do testify, if you could provide and advise the board of the differences between this two as far as scope and size. So you've got the floor, Danny, and if you could speak up.
All right. Well, I'm gonna actually let Stephen go through it. He has the report there, and I'm traveling. I'm probably gonna break in and out, so I'm gonna put it on mute. That way you don't hear my background, and I'll let Stephen go over how we did. He's as familiar with it as I am, so if you don't mind.
No, thank you, Madam Chairman, if that's acceptable.
Yeah, that's fine.
Stephen, it's all yours.
I'm sorry, I had you guys on mute. Can you get me up real quick?
Is that Tyler?
Nope, this is Steven.
No, Stephen, basically what Tony wants is for you to go through the engineer's report, what we did, and what the results are, and then if you can explain the difference between the $12.5 million and the $20 million. So just kind of describe what we did for the engineer's report.
Yeah, sure. So, as you know, this all started because we need to get verified for the SRF loan. So we first started by looking at the price to do the project for just the SRF lake, the 13, which are shown on figure 1, page 4. Breaking out.
Stephen, I guess for clarification, when you say, I would call it, that's the first phase of lakes, is it correct?
First section of the first
First
phase.
section of the first phase. I wouldn't be so limiting as to say the first SRF, because it might be additional SRF borrowing.
Yeah, and I think the other one is, Stephen, I think everybody's got the background. I think the big thing is the way we have in front of us is two reports, one for $12.5 million and one for $20 million. The derivation of the differences is really the critical issue that's at hand.
I mean, really, the only difference is the total amount. I mean, you guys wanted to go ahead and validate for $20 million opposed to $12.5 million. So all I did was calculate how much more linear feet of lake we can do with the difference.
Well, so I guess the critical element is that the difference between the two reports, the size and scope of the project in the report that has a $20 million cost is greater in scope than the one that was for the $12.5 million. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And these are all the lakes that are referenced in the second report all need remedial action similar to the lakes that are in the first report, correct?
That is correct. We only reference specifically the 13 lakes that are currently under the scope of this SRF project that is underway. We mention a linear footage of lakes. The exact number is 35,800 and 65,000 linear feet of lake that can be repaired with the extra money in this project.
Well, but I guess
We
it's,
don't actually specify any other lakes. It's actually just a linear footage.
but the scope of the project are additional lakes consisting of additional linear footage, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, if I think, Stephen, I think it's true, if you look at page 11 in both reports and put them side by side, you note that the first two columns are exactly the same. Phase 1, which is the first 5 ponds in Phase 1, a little confusing, is the 4.4 million. The Phase 2 is the next 8, which is the 5,127. The difference is between the 12.5 and the 20 is that on page 11 of the 12.5 million, you only have 2.8 million left to do what is 64 less 13, 51 ponds. On the other one, you got 10.1 million to do the remainder of the ponds. And based on the assumption that we have a lower, more cost-efficient method of erosion control, we can do a lot more ponds at that lower price. Hence, 20 million should be enough to finance the rest of the work that we have yet to do.
And that would be all the ponds, correct?
As best we can tell, all the ponds.
Thank you.
All the ponds that have erosion issues.
Yes.
Which is? Number-wise?
Well, right off, Bill, I think there's 13 in the first set of Phase 1, then there was, I believe, 14 or 15 in Phase 2 and 19 in Phase 3. So if you add those up, it does not come up to 64, and the reason it doesn't is we didn't count the flowways, we didn't count the ponds in the FPL easement, and we didn't count ponds that did not have a residential component. And then lastly, we didn't count ponds that didn't have a problem. For example, Pond 105 in Gateway,
It totals 46 if you need.
so there you go. 46 essentially of 64 is what we're dealing with on that total estimated price of $20 million.
David Lapidus, do you have any questions for Stephen Agapi?
No, I do not.
Thank you. Any members of the board have any questions for Stephen Agapi?
Nope.
Thank you.
I do not.
Madam Chair, with your indulgence, I'd like to have Russ Wire introduce you to Russ Wire. And Russ, if you can briefly provide your background, why you were retained, and what work you performed, and what reports you prepared.
Yes, good afternoon, board members. For the record, I'm Russ Wire. I'm with Real Estate Econometrics. It's my own company. My background, I've been in real estate business, development, and all of that for a long period of time. Started my company about 3 years ago. Prior to that, the prior 10 years, I was with Fishkind and Associates. So my background is in economics, and it's also primarily my expertise is in community development districts. My company manages 3 districts on our own, and at the same time, I also work with a number of different districts doing methodologies and also coming back in and working on methodologies that have been done in the past. So that's kind of my background. I have a undergraduate degree from Michigan State. I know I wasn't supposed to mention that, but I did. And my graduate degree, I have an MBA from the University of Miami. So those are my credentials. I was asked to take a look at the, first of all, to understand the situation of the remediation of the lakes that you're going to have to do. And so what happens is I was asked to put together a methodology that actually does 2 things so we understand this, and they follow the various and appropriate chapters within the Florida statutes. One, it determines the special and peculiar benefits that flow to certain of the properties within a portion of the district. It's a logical connection from the infrastructure systems and facilities, and 2, apportion those special benefits on a basis that is fair and reasonable. Now, originally what I did is I took a look at the original tax roll, and it was provided to me by special district. Sorry.
ST.
Yes, thank you. And I've worked both with Stephen and with Liz on that tax roll. I took a look at it. I did a few tests in there. The primary thing I wanted to do on the test was I was looking at the bigger parcels to begin with. All the single family had an EAU of 1. So I went through and took a look at some of the bigger parcels. We found a couple of discrepancies, worked those out. Then I went back and took a look at how the methodology was prepared originally. So this was back in 1986, I believe it was, correct, Ed? And the way they had calculated it, they took a section of about 600 and some odd acres originally. And then they were determining the number of commercial acres, the number of residential acres. And then they also took a look at the impervious surfaces of the commercial and the impervious surfaces of the residential. Came up with a ratio for those 2, or a denominator for those 2, and then they divided those 2 together to get this ratio of the 1 to 5.8. So to me, at that time, and taking a look at it, it seemed to be fair and equitable, and it did, show the proportionate special benefit. So, seeing that and assuming that and not assuming, but figuring that was okay, we went back into the parcels again, and that's when I got to meet Mr. Tinkle.
You're fading in and out.
Am I fading away? Can you hear me because you're on the speakerphone, aren't you?
Yeah, you may need to speak up a bit, Russ.
Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, we went through the parcels, and the issues started to come up with regard to the commercial parcels. And first of all, we had to check their designation, and then were we applying the special and peculiar benefit or the proportion correctly. And we went through, ultimately, it turned out to be about 70, 75 parcels that we reviewed individually. And some of them, we did some corrections, some of them were fine, some of them we had to go into layers even further, taking a look at was it platted, wasn't it platted, If it was platted, what kind of a platting was it? And if it was a certain kind of a platting, we had to go underneath that to take a look at the zoning layer to see truly what it was. So we went through all those parcels and back and forth for the last week or two and went parcel by parcel. And there was a sheet given to you that shows all the changes we made. Ultimately, the original methodology tax roll had 6,173.69 EAUs, and we found that we added 27.05 more EAUs to it, so our new tax roll is 6,200.74 EAUs. But it's now correct to the best of our knowledge and going through it in fine detail. From there, what we would do is I took the overall, I did the financing part of it, and you have two reports. One was based on the 12.5 million, the other was based on the 25 million, and you used the the 20 million. It's 25 million, because I keep throwing the financing in there, or the interest. I used the engineer's report as the basis for that. And then I took those and I put them through an amortization table for 20 years, which is based on the loan that you're looking to secure from the state. And then I also, when I ran it through the amortization table, calculated all the interest that will have to be paid on top of that loan. Then I took that total amount, which now I can say is it's 15.5 million roughly on the $12 million loan and the 24 million on the $20 million loan. And then I created divided that by your total number of EAUs. And then I have an EAU, I have an amount per EAU. And that's your assessment. That will be the ceiling assessment. Is that correct, Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
At that point. And then we went back through the tax roll and calculated if it had 1 ERU, it got that amount. If it had 2 ERUs, it got 2 times that amount. If it had a 0.7 ERU, it got a 0.7 of that amount. And then we added them all up to make sure that it tallied. And it did. So that's how we got to our ERUs and the assessments on the ERUs.
And,
EAUs.
Mr. Wire, based upon your report, the allocation of the assessments is fair, equitable, and proportionate across all the benefited properties?
And
especially
reasonable.
benefit from this
And-
project?
Yes, and reasonable.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, sir.
And you prepared, as I believe you mentioned to the board, you prepared an updated report dated April 25th, 2017, and then had a handout showing the difference between the report from last week and the one of April 25th.
That is correct.
And April 25th is the most current and correct version.
That is correct.
I think there's one minor correction in the numbers that needs to be made. I think page 9 of your report.
Yes, sir.
I think Mr. Tinkle brought to your attention. In the last line of page 9, when it addresses the Daniels industrial parcels, the EAU factor is 0.87, I believe.
It is 0.87, it is not 1, that is correct. And just for clarification, everybody understands, what we ended up doing was going back and looking at the parcel, and the way it's calculated is you have 5.8 EAUs per acre on a commercial parcel. We took that commercial parcel and multiplied its acreage by the 5.8, and then we took all of that, whatever that total was, and the EAU, and then divided it by the number of units, and it actually came out to 0.87, not a 1.
Benefiting units.
Benefiting units, correct.
Madam Chairman,
Go ahead.
may I ask a few questions
Certainly, go right ahead.
of our witness?
Yes, sir.
Well, that wasn't supposed to be funny.
Well,
I like to keep things light. Sir, have you done work similar to this exact presentation in the past?
yes, sir.
And can you tell me why it is so important at this moment that we go through all of this detail?
The reason being is you want to determine the special and peculiar benefit that a piece of land or property is receiving. And it is different for different types of uses. Therefore, we go through this calculation to determine that special and peculiar benefit.
And as I look at some of the assessments, especially for the commercial properties, I say to myself, if I owned that property, I think I'd be talking to a lawyer, because these are big numbers that are going to be assessed against this property. Are you prepared to defend in court, if need be, your your work and your expert opinion on this?
Yes, sir. Yes, and it's based on the pervious and impervious surfaces. So, yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Yeah, and if I may, just briefly, Russ, you mentioned before that you alluded to a 1986 Commissioner's Report, which established the original methodology for what was then called the Water Management Benefit Tax,
That's correct.
and then became a special assessment. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And isn't it also correct that in 1994, there was a second Commissioner's Report for the second assessment area of a larger acreage that utilized that same formula that was
Yes.
in the first Commissioner's Report?
Yes, sir.
And you reviewed that methodology also?
Yes, sir.
And those are the methodologies you applied in, on the ratios from the residential to commercial in your methodology report?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, Marty, pointing out one thing that Bill brings up is that Russ is eating from the dish that he was given. This goes back to 1986, and this is what I've been harping at for 10, 12 years. This is the assessment methodology that we've been using at Gateway since day one. So the commercial users, much to the opposite of what you're saying, Bill, if they thought they were getting the raw end of the stick, they would have been in here many, many years ago. We've talked about this several times. The system needs to be reexamined because just a quick analysis of some of our commercial properties, impervious and the other, takes us into Never Never Land. We need to look at this, but for this purpose now, this is what we got and this is what we have to testify to.
And I believe Russ has indicated it's defensible. And one other aspect of it is, again, when the board sets the public hearing, notices will go out to each individual property owner that's listed, in each folio that's listed in Russ's role. Stephen Company will send that to a mailing company. And on June 8th, what we're asking for is the board to have that hearing,
What day?
June 8th. And the board will sit as an equalization board, and the property owners can come in and indicate whether they have comments, objections with regards to the project and/or the level of assessment. And would articulate, and the board will then sit and make a determination as to whether or not an objection that was raised is appropriate for an adjustment to be made or not to be made. And that's part of the hearing that you'll have on June 8th, in this case.
Madam Chairman, may I ask another question or
Certainly,
two?
go right ahead.
I'm sorry, Mr. Guy, if I interrupted your train of thought. I
No, that's
apologize.
fine. I hadn't thought of it until you just brought it to my memory. In previous meetings of this board, I was of the opinion that we ought to stick to the $6 million, which had been the number we had been operating on until a month or so ago. And now we're up to 12.5 and 25, numbers of which are fairly significant, but also as we go out chronologically on these lake bank restoration projects, my experience with dealing with estimates is the further you go out chronologically, the less accurate your original estimates were. If you want to argue with that, I'd be happy to, but I found that to be nearly 100% correct. If you agree with that, then what I'm asking you is, why would you recommend, if you are, that we give any consideration to a $25 million project at this time?
Well,
20, Bill.
the-
Well, I thought it was 29, I thought it was 25.
20.
Well, I think
Well, it is-
with interest, it's 25 for the larger one, and with interest, it's 15.5
Correct.
for the first one.
We-
Correct.
We can
Principal's
agree
20.
on a number to bat about for this conversation,
Principal's 20.
if you wish. You want to use 20, I'll use 20.
Principal's 20.
But,
Well, Mr. Guy, there are a couple of things. First of all, that's really an answer that you'll need to get from the engineer. I just do the methodology part of it. However, from a financing standpoint, from an assessment standpoint, we are setting, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Piers, we're setting the ceiling on the assessment at this point. And therefore, if we decide to go even more on down in the future, you'll have to go through the whole process again of validation and everything else. And so generally what we want to try and do is, what we're doing now is we're setting the ceiling. Whether you do 20 million, you do 12 million, you do 6 million, you can do that under this as long as those assessments don't go above what we're setting as a ceiling. So,
And if the state decides on a further loan that they're going to change the interest rate from 2.18 to 4.18, everything you've done goes in the hat,
No.
does it
No,
not?
it's
No.
only the
If
principal.
you can explain that, Russ, what happens in that instance then?
in that case, I think you are correct. If they do change it, if we take it all out at once, you don't have to worry about it. If we decide to take the 20 million now. If you take it now and then in the future it goes up to 4%, you'll just have a little less for your capital improvement.
A little less,
Yeah. Well,
yes.
I haven't calculated it,
Yes,
but
a lot
all I'm
less.
saying is your CIP, your capital improvement program, or your lake bank program, you'll have less money in there to do that.
With the exception of only having to go through the court validation one time, is there any other advantage to going with such a high number, be it 20 or 25?
I'm sorry, you were going to say?
Fees,
Fees?
fees.
Yeah, because you're right, that is correct, because when you do the validation, you got the fees, and you have to add that on top of that. That is correct.
Well, I said, when I said validation, I
With
intended
outside of the
that I'd be
validation?
capitalized with everything included.
Yeah.
But with the exception of the validation, is there any other advantage to going now with such a big number?
I would suggest that validation is a good reason in and of itself.
And I guess the question would be whether or not Mr. Wire agrees it gives greater flexibility for financing this project in the future. Once again, it's a tool that's available, may not be used, as opposed to when you realize if you need more money down the road and you can only get borrowing of greater than 5-year maturity, you have to validate again. And then in that case, if that's challenged and not validated, then you go back to 5 years. So this is a one-time opportunity to get flexibility on the borrowing. And again, that's ultimately a board policy decision. And
That's
and I
correct.
guess, Russ, in your experience, and you are a manager of districts too, is that not correct?
That is correct, and I also do methodologies and do this process for very large communities like Ave Maria as an
But
example.
the sizing of the bonds for the initial validation, typically at the inception of the community development district, have you found those to be quite large and never exceeded or even?
That is
close?
correct. They are quite large. I mean, one of the ones that I'm doing, just for an example, is Hacienda Lakes down in Naples, and we validated about $40 million worth of bonds. We'll never get there. Ave Maria, we validated $850 million worth of bonds. We'll probably borrow $100 million. And so it just kept the ceiling there for us and gave us that flexibility going forward, so.
And again, it's ultimately a policy decision.
Correct.
It does provide flexibility for borrowing in the future for this project. David Lapidus, did you have anything to offer, or?
Yeah, I was going to say that one thing that I added a little phrase to the resolution that I circulated to you and to Diana before the meeting started. A slight change from the version that had been circulated for the prior meeting, and that was, and let me pull the language up. Properly quoted.
I think it's a page 2, David.
It's where I said that the board, that it would come back to the board for approval on a future, with a future resolution. And that was in terms of what would be the type of the next deal. Would it be an SRS loan? Would it be a bank loan? Or would it be a traditional bond transaction?
Okay, what we'll do, we're making copies of that, David, and then when we get to that point, once the board decides which engineer's report and matching master assessment methodology it wishes to go through the scope of the project, and then we have the number of the resolutions, and thank you for pointing that out, I appreciate it. Russ, do you have anything more you wish to offer, or any members of the board have any further questions of Mr. Wire? Or Stephen, or?
I want to thank Stephen and Liz and Russ, especially. Nice working with you on this. This was a challenge to get this done right, and I am confident in 10 years of dealing with this mess. It may not be the way I like it, but I think it's right.
It's right.
It's correct. That's
Thank you.
almost a home run, but
Got halfway down third.
Yeah, what we have, again, there are 3 resolutions in front of you for your consideration. And David, if I get them out of order from your perspective, please chime in, and I know you're shy about doing that. The first resolution is Resolution 2017-10, with regards to adopting the engineer's report and the estimated cost of the improvements. And there are a number of blanks in there because, again, I wanted to make sure we had the correct current date of the engineer's report and the assessment report. And what's important is on Section 4 of Resolution 2017-10, it references the total estimated cost of the improvements, yes, and then also the assessments will defray approximately X number of dollars in bonded indebtedness. So now the board needs to make a
I was gonna say,
decision.
wouldn't it be appropriate at this point in time to introduce a motion selecting?
Yes,
Okay.
and then we can then go to the
That's what I thought.
resolutions.
I will then introduce the motion that we accept the engineer's report and the master assessment methodology report that are based on an ultimate approval of $20 million principal.
Do I hear a second? I'm gonna second that.
Thank you.
Kathy, you had questions?
I do have a question. My question is to go with the EAUs, how much it will be for each of those? It said 199, if I recall. But I want to know if, sorry, if those EAUs added on would be this, according to 2017, like the first one, was $438.11. Then we would add on the 199, and there would
Thank you.
not be any other increase.
I'm not sure what you're looking at.
If you can speak a little louder, Mrs.
Yeah.
Flaherty and Mr. Bloom, so that David Lapidus and,
I'm speaking as loud as I can.
oh, I'm sorry, you had a tooth, that's right. If you can speak into the micro, maybe pull the microphone closer, is that possible? Let's see if I can help on that. Chris, I'm gonna move this closer, sorry, Mrs. Flaherty, thank you.
I'm sorry.
No, thank you.
Okay. According to the EAUs that we paid for 2017, I'm taking the first one. It's $438.11 for 2017. Now, we would add on to that,
Kathy, what page you on?
I'm on my budget.
She's
Yeah.
looking at the
The-
budget.
That's,
Yeah, so I can, let me just rephrase the question. The question is, in looking at the 2017 budget in the assessment chart, the total, and you're looking at for O&M and for Lake Bank, that
Okay.
number that you're giving me is for both.
Mm-hmm,
Would we then be adding on another number?
right.
Okay, so here's how this would work. Again, you're setting your high ceiling mark for the entire project. Every year, we're gonna be assessing based on the money we have pulled down and gonna be using, not the whole amount. So each year is gonna depend upon what the board has approved for those projects. It's not gonna be everything all at once.
Steve, put it another way, if we borrow the 20 million right now, this is what your assessment would be.
If you borrow the entire amount,
Entire amount.
once this gets approved, it would be the entire amount of it's the second to last column. I have it up on the screen.
It's gonna be
It's
staggered
small.
over a
You've
lot
got
of
the
years.
commercials up, can you move it a little?
I will move it down once I got.
And I think also, Stephen, as part of that, the board had increased, I think, for each AAU last year, an amount of $65 to pay for the Lake Bank project, and
Already.
the $65 would be in that, assuming the
Right.
maximum 199, that's the amortized amount.
It's part of.
Correct. So it would not be an additional $199 because that already includes $66, $65 in it.
Okay.
So again, if you were to borrow the full amount, once this validation goes through, it would be an additional about $130 roughly
$130
Correct.
$130.
per year,
per EAU.
per EAU.
Per year, per EAU.
Right, so, and again, residential is one, so it would be for
Yep.
each residential, one EAU, an additional, the $133.
And it would increase to this amount, but the first year, we're not gonna be borrowing the
It's gonna be
20
staggered,
million, so
yeah.
it'll be staggered.
Staggered,
With
right.
that being the cap.
May I ask a
Certainly.
question, sir? From what you said, is it true that regardless of whether we adopt 20 million or the 12.5, the amount of the assessment is going to be the same initially because it's gonna be based on the amount we borrow? That's a question.
That's correct, yes. It's gonna be amount on you borrow, whether you put it to 25 or the 12.5. It's still gonna be what you pull down and borrow. That's what you're gonna get assessed every year, and every year it's gonna have to be looked at again and adjusted accordingly, depending upon additional projects, additional withdrawals. But again, this is just setting your ceiling.
Little bit clarification. SRF has something to do with this. When we borrowed the 6 million, even the fact that we're only going to take out 4.4 million of it this first half of a year, they made us put into our accounting last year the 6 million, principal and interest payment. That's how we got to 65. If next year we saw we were going to do 30 more ponds, for example, and it was gonna cost 8 million more, so we went from 6 to 14, they'll make us put in 8 million worth of principal and interest in addition to the 6. If we only borrow 1 more, they just add 1 million's worth principal and interest. SRF is a little bit different. Theirs is, they want to see you having the ability and pass the assessment to cover the payment of their note. Like, that's about as simple as you can make it. So whatever we borrow from SRF, they're the ones that tell us, like this time we borrowed 6 million, they told us to put in 367,000 in principal and interest.
Which equates to 65,
Which
66
equates to
for
$65.
EAU. If they had asked, if you wanted to borrow 12, they would have had you amortize the
Double it.
12 over the 20.
Right.
Is that a fair statement?
Yep.
Now, okay. So I want to just clarify that the most it can be is $130 more per EAU per
Correct.
year.
If,
Assuming the full borrowing.
assuming the
The full-
full 20 million is borrowed.
Okay,
And
And
assuming that
the
interest rate.
interest
Assuming
rate.
the same interest rate.
Correct.
okay.
And all the other variables that are in here for fees and stuff.
Now, when we do the budget, okay, that means still does not, this does not include what EAUs will have to increase for the budget, if you have to increase the budget?
Again,
Yeah.
just to make sure I understand the question and answer it correctly. When you do the budget, when we start the budget, which will be just around the corner, we're gonna have to look at the projects that the board feels like they want to accomplish, and the EAUs will have to be adjusted based on that. So right now, you're basically committed to about 4.4, and I believe you really want to even get over 6. So it sounds like, based on previous discussions, at the very least, you're gonna be at your 6. If you were to stay at 6 right now, you wouldn't have to change anything, because you already have $6 million
Covered.
assessed.
And yet, the other difference would be that in your budget, as opposed to $65 being in the O&M piece of your budget, in the general fund, it'll be a debt service fund account in your budget.
Right.
But that, I mean,
Currently- yeah.
it has no effect on the property owner, but that's just from the
Right,
standpoint of
right now,
accounting for the money.
we have set up a fund 006. It's separate from the general fund. It will be converted to a debt service fund and just will mirror everything. It's mechanics, a little bit of mechanics, but again, it'll be helpful for us as we move forward with the methodologies and communicating that a little easier to people.
And another point too, Steve, and Russ can chime in. When we were going through this, there's some properties that are on the verge of development that we could easily pop 500 to 1,000 EAUs, more than what we got right now in the next 2 years, very
And-
easily.
That's a very good point, because
It's spread.
Spread it
as
out.
much as this is not a static number right now in
Yes.
terms of your total
It's
EAUs.
variable every
I mean,
year.
we've seen that with Pelican Preserve. There have been some years where they've had some really nice jumps, and again, that makes it better for everybody. But you have unplatted parcels here, you have other parcels commercial that are changing. Every year, this roll is gonna have to be kinda gone through and, for lack of a better word, scrubbed based on any changes and adjustments that are made. And again, you're setting your high water mark, but these numbers could come down.
Yes, very
Okay.
easily.
Well, Russ, if you get to the podium, thank you.
For the record, Russ Wire again, as you add EAUs to this total, then you're spreading it out more, so your assessments are gonna be a little bit less. Therefore, as I said, if it stayed stagnant the way we are now, borrowing the maximum amount, that's what that number is setting, and we can't get over that. So, I think it'll start to, as we said,
Speak up for David.
I'm sorry, we identified a few other parcels that will ultimately add more EAUs to this. So right now, you're just setting the ceiling. That's why they make us go through the bond validation process.
Okay.
Good examples. We have one in there, I'm not gonna get into names, one that's a drastic. It's in there at 55, 53.99, whatever the number is,
Correct.
EAUs. They're talking right now 500 EAUs on that one parcel. So we're talking about substantial things that could happen in Gateway in growth and new houses, especially the areas yet to be developed, and switching over. This 12-acre parcel right next to the old bank, there's one that the minute something goes in there, that goes from 12 to 12 times 5.8. So we can see jumps, but the bottom line is, like Steve said, every year we recalculate, and every new distribution of EAUs, 6,200, 6,500, 6,800, that $65 number, if it's at 6 million, just keeps coming down and down and down.
Right.
So it's advantageous to us, especially when you have growth.
Madam Chair.
Madam Chairman.
Go ahead, Bill, and I'll go to Kathy.
I'm sorry. And then Kath?
Yeah,
Oh,
both raise your hand at the same time.
I move to amend the dollar amount to 12.5 million.
I think we have a motion on the floor, I think.
This is a motion to amend that motion.
I'm not
The,
finished.
the original.
I'm not
Mo-
finished with the original.
This is a motion to amend
I
your
understand.
motion. If it gets a second. Is there a second? No second?
No second.
No second.
Sorry, Bill.
Okay.
Ms.
That's
Flaherty.
because I'm still trying to talk, trying to understand this. Now, we're saying this is 130, okay? So when the residents come to, and have asked me, what is going to be the final amount? This is not, this 130 we're going to add to this, but it could be more, okay? If our budget says that we have to add more. Is this what, I'm trying to, if you put out a budget, and the budget, whatever reason the budget comes out, and these amounts come out more than we have here, right? Then we have to tax the people more. Is this correct? I know you're calling it EAUs, but it's actually a tax. And
Well,
what I want to be able to explain to them, which I've already been asked, is what this going to give us, is that going to make it the final EAUs? And then when you do the budget, there's not going to be an increase. So this will be the only increase
Okay.
for this year.
Well, for clarity, let me make sure I understand the question. Are you talking about both lake banks plus O&M?
Yes, everything.
Well, I can't answer
That's
the O&M
apples and
part.
oranges.
That's,
We don't know.
you're gonna have to go through the budget process first, and then there's
Yes.
a lot of work and a lot of decisions that'll have to go to do that. Now, in the current year in 2017, we actually were able to increase it, put in the $65 and find some nice reductions in O&M to offset it, so that it wasn't nearly, the full increase. We just won't know yet, moving forward for 2018.
Yeah, Mr.
Because-
Flaherty, I think one way maybe to address it, and Stephen can slap me upside the head if I misstate it, or Mr. Tinkley's right next to me, it'd be a lot easier to backhand me, is that assume for sake of discussion that the full $20 million is borrowed. And with all the amortization tables reflect that each AAU would pay $199.84 over a period of 20 years.
Per year.
Per year for 20, if you borrow $20 million.
But we said,
Right now, the $65 was pegged at $6 million borrowing over a period of 20 years. That $65 that's being used now for the lake bank restoration will come off of the O&M fund piece and go into the debt service fund. So in other words, you may end up reducing, it's a lot of the variables, the assessment for the O&M piece by 65 for the lake bank project. You may increase it for other areas, but you reduce it for the lake bank program, put that in the debt service amount. So when people are paying, they're paying, that 65 is still there, but it's put into a different fund. And if the board only borrows $6 million, that's what this amortization may end up being based upon the interest rates. Is that a fair statement, Stephen, or not? Is that a little more confusing?
Robbing Peter to pay
Yeah.
Paul.
I mean, you're calling it something different.
That's all it is.
But at the end of the day, right now, we can't answer whether the O&M will go up. We can only basically make decisions based on what's in front of you for the Lake Bank part.
Okay.
So, I mean, theoretically, you could offset it with something else, but
And again, the 199 is only if you borrow the full 20 million.
Right. The assessment for, let's say, 2018 is not going to include the full 20 million because we won't have
Oh, no.
borrowed that amount for next year. It will probably go up, but it won't be $130. That will increase as we borrow money to do more restoration.
Correct.
We would have to vote on that.
Yes, to do the borrowing, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. The same thing would have happened, as Mr. Tinkle mentioned. Assume for sake of discussion that the state didn't require, the legislation didn't require validation for borrowings more than 5-year maturity. But you decided, as you went along, to increase the scope and borrow $6 million now from SRF, $8 million later on from SRF, $6 more million from SRF. Then you're at your $20 million. And then you would have these higher assessment levels, but that would be incremental. This is similar because you're starting off with just a maximum amount of borrowing, and you don't have to borrow all of it.
Okay. I have a couple. So this is the maximum amount, so we would not have to borrow any more than that to do the
No, I'm not saying you wouldn't have to,
restoration.
but that's what you're saying you would be the maximum amount. If you decide to change your mind later on, you'd have to go through another methodology, another validation, if you're going to do a maturity of more than 5 years of the borrowing. If you do a maturity of less than 5 years or less, you don't need to go through the validation, but you still may need to go through this process.
But if you go to 5 years, you're gonna quadruple the principal and interest payment, which is just insanity.
So after we do the budget, okay, I just want to make sure, when I explain this, we will have another, like, town hall meeting to go over the budget if the EAUs go up again. Is
No,
this
what's-
correct?
No, what's gonna happen is, when the board makes a decision, the EAUs don't go up. That's a method, if the assessment amounts are to go up, it'd be based upon additional borrowings, if you're talking about debt service. And the board at a public hearing would have to make a decision to do an additional borrowing.
But it wouldn't have to do with the budget? I mean,
no, you will absolutely have several more opportunities, the board will, to be voting and discussing this. There will be public hearings for the budget that will be required. There will be more notices as a part of the budget process that will have to go out if the per EAU amount goes up. So there will be several.
Stephen, to put it another way too, is our normal budgeting process, that's going to be starting in a couple of months, starting tomorrow,
Yeah.
might have tacked onto it this summer, should we elect to do those next 8 ponds of the 13. If those exceed 1.6 million, which is what's left out of the 6, then we have to talk about a board action to authorize a reapplication to SRF to go above $6 million. And
That's
that would
correct.
be a separate budget trail item.
That's right. So the board would have to vote, again, to have Danny and Tyler proceed to go back to the SRL to get those additional amounts included. Otherwise, you couldn't do it anyways.
Could do it anyway.
What we're trying to do is set a cap, that the most that it'll ever be at any point in time is this amount.
Unless you decide down the road, separate board action, way down the road
That would be a completely
to-
separate.
process
Correct.
to exceed this amount.
Any other questions?
I think I got them all answered.
Okay.
Thank you.
No questions. Motion?
So we've got a motion. And I'll ask you just to repeat the motion so everybody's clear.
The motion is to proceed with the resolutions on the basis of the engineering report and master assessment methodology report outlining a maximum exposure of $20 million.
Of principal.
I'm sorry, a principal of $20 million.
Sorry, Bill.
Sorry.
And I did second that, so with that in mind, I will call the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, board
N-
members.
Thank you very much. And now we need to get to numbers, and David, I might need your assistance on this. The first resolution, and Russ also, the first resolution we have, Resolution 2017-10. I will fill in the blank with the district engineer's report that was prepared on March 22nd.
That's the
April 11th, 2017 will be the first blank on page 1 of Resolution 2017-10. The next area is the Master Assessment Methodology Report date in the first whereas at the top of page 2 of Resolution 2017-10, and that will be April 25th, 2017. And the next blank.
April 25th?
25th, yes.
Today's the 27th.
Yeah.
Right, but he prepared it as of the 25th.
Dated the 25th.
That's the one that
We do one
was
at a
sent
time.
to us.
Yeah.
On the 26th.
And I didn't bother to print it out, right? Okay.
15 pages.
Invested in company.
And the section 4, the total estimated cost of the improvements is approximately, that would be the $20 million number. Is that correct, David and Russ? David?
Yeah.
And in section 5, it says the assessments will defray approximately, that'll be the $25 million in bonded indebtedness, which includes without limitation estimated cost plus financing related costs. Is that correct? And with those, what I would request is the board, and then on page 4 for the Exhibit A, the blank for the engineer's report, again, will be April 11th, 2017. And Exhibit B will be the Master Assessment Methodology Report dated April 25th, 2017. And what we would request is a motion for the adoption of Resolution 2017-10 with the insertion of all those dates and numbers.
So moved.
Could you repeat all that slower?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
On the first page, there's a blank in the first whereas on the left, and that would be for the Tetra Tech report, to insert April 11th.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
On page 2, on the first, on the whereas at the top of page 2, that blank for the date of the Master Assessment Methodology Report is April 25th, 2017. In section 4 at page 2, the estimated cost is $20 million. On section 5 at page 2, the total cost, including financing, et cetera, is $25 million. At page 4, the reference to Exhibit A, the blank, again, that would be April 11th, referencing the engineer's report. In Exhibit B, reference, insert April 25th, 2017, for the Master Assessment Methodology Report. I apologize for talking too fast.
Again, so moved.
We have a motion, and I need a second. Okay. Any other
I
discussion?
just have one question, Mr. Attorney. What does this resolution do that we didn't just do in our previous vote?
This is the one that declares the special assessments and then calls for the public hearing. And then we have multiple resolutions that this is one of the multiple steps that need to be taken under the Florida statutes when levying and imposing special assessments. The board first action was to determine which project scope you want to utilize, and these are the implementing resolutions for that. And there'll be one more after your public hearing. We have the final.
Is the public
assessments.
hearing date in here? I didn't-
That'll be one of the subsequent resolutions.
So we'll do sure.
That's in the next resolution, 2017-13.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Thank you. The next resolution is resolution number 2017-3. And in the whereas, it's a resolution, I'll read it gently. A resolution of the Board of Supervisors of the Gateway Services Community Development District, setting a public hearing to be held on June 8th, 2017 at 5 p.m. at the Gateway Trinity Lutheran Church, 11381 Gateway Boulevard, Fort Myers, Florida, for the purpose of hearing public comment on imposing special assessments on certain property within the district, generally described as the Gateway Services, you got a typo there, Community Development District, and it references the resolution 2017-10 that was just adopted. And in section 1 of resolution 2017-13, again reiterates, there is hereby declared a public hearing to be held on June 8th, 2017 at 5 p.m. We will insert at the Gateway Trinity Lutheran Church, 11381 Gateway Boulevard at 5 p.m. And it also, section 2 requires that notice of the hearing is advertised in the newspaper. And the district manager is also further authorized and required and directed to give 30 days written notice by mail to all the affected property owners. We would request an adoption of resolution 2017-13 with those dates and location inserted.
So moved.
Second.
Question?
Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Why are we doing this on June 8th? Our June 1st meeting is, first meeting in June is June 1st.
I think there are two reasons. One, trying to meet the notice requirements of the mailed notice for the merging of the rolls that Mr. Wire prepared with the letter that that needs to be sent to the property owners. There's a 5 business day, 7 to 10 day time frame. And also, I think the board indicated it wished to have a separate hearing just on this topic to make sure that there was plenty of opportunity if the public wished to speak and plenty of time to hear the comments of the public on this issue. And 5 o'clock was a time frame in order to try to maximize the amount of attendance. That was my recollection.
And how many notices are gonna have to be sent out by mail for this?
What, 6,200?
How many?
6,200. This is similar to when, this is similar to a couple of years ago when you raised the O&M assessment. I can't remember
Oh, yeah.
what year
Well,
that was.
even-
Same
That was
thing.
even more, that was
Oh,
close
there's
to
Pelican
7.
Reserve too.
Pelican Reserve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is actually smaller than the last time.
We could see that you get a letter over there, Bill.
What's that?
We can see that you get a letter
You won't be
over
on
there.
this list, Mr.
You're not
Brown.
on this list.
Yeah, every parcel that's on the assessment roll
Yeah,
will get a letter.
I just wondered what that number was.
I was going to mention, it's really under
It's under
6,200 because we have some that,
Yeah,
a
it's
lot of
commercials.
EAUs
Yeah,
out
there's
there.
about 42 to 4,500 lines
Yeah.
Right.
of parcels, so.
A little less than 5,000.
If you want to, Mr. Guy, we can send you a courtesy notice.
Very
Courtesy.
funny.
I know. Uh-oh.
Silly one.
I think, was there a motion?
Asked to call the motion?
Uh,
Yeah, I think it was seconded, Kathy did.
Any other questions?
We are still having a regular board meeting on June the 1st, though?
That's correct. It's just an extra meeting that, for the benefit of
I'm
the
not there yet.
public to
Thank
be
you.
able to
Thank you.
participate. It was deemed that this would be the best way to do it.
I hope that's not a mistake.
I understand. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Mr. Attorney?
Lastly, and thank you, Madam Chairman and members of the board. Lastly, we have, it's unnumbered in front of you, but we had a number early. Yeah, 2017-14. David, you took off the number, but anyway, we have a resolution 2017-14. And on the first page, it's a resolution authorizing the incurrence of not to exceed $20 million aggregate principal amount. There'll be $20 million on the first page of resolution 2017-14. And we have on page 2, we'll insert the date of the engineer's report in the blank, which is April 11th. That's in the first whereas. On the third whereas at page 2 of the resolution, the aggregate principal amount will be not to exceed $20 million. and we call it the initial SRF advance, but that's, again, assuming that's the maximum amount. The next whereas is what we had language in earlier, and also additional language added for flexibility that Mr. Lapide has added. To retain, the district desires to retain the flexibility to finance additional phases of the project through the SRF program, or if such facility is not practically available or is deemed by the board to be too expensive, from a bank or other lending institution, or through the issuance of bonds or notes, the interest on which is included in income or is excluded from income from federal income tax purposes, or a combination of such financings, which additional advances may be on a parity with or subordinate to initial SRF advances, as the board may decide by future resolution. And then we have on section 1 at page 3 of resolution 2017-14, the district authorizes a project as described in the report and the incurrence of borrowings in an amount not to exceed $20 million. And on page 5 of the report, David has already changed section 8 to reference the master assessment methodology report dated April 25th. David has corrected the date of the resolution, and then exhibits C and D will be completed by exhibit C, the engineer's report, April 11th, 2017, and the master assessment methodology report of April 25th, 2017. David, from your perspective, have I inserted all the correct numbers?
Yes, you have.
We would request then the board consider adopting resolution number 2017-14, and it also references a form of a trust agreement and form of loan agreement. Those are the exact same form of trust agreements and form of loan agreements will be attached to this resolution that were previously attached to a resolution adopted by the board earlier this year. 2017-7, I believe, was the prior resolution that adopted the form of the loan
And the
agreement.
reason that they're added, brought back before the board here is just so that when we take this resolution to the court for the validation, we're not crashing the court with as much paper as we could. Reduce the amount of paper.
Yeah, and what this also does, this resolution 2017-14 also authorizes the initiation of the validation proceedings.
Yeah.
I will make a motion to approve Resolution 2017-14
With the insertions.
with the insertions mentioned.
Do I have a second?
I'll second with a question.
Go ahead.
I didn't get a chance to read this as fast as you were going through here.
I'm sorry.
But I didn't see anything where you or the district manager or anybody is responsible for reporting back to this board that the validation has been approved.
It's not in the resolution, but I absolutely will do that because I will be one happy camper when that happens. Because I will advise the board of the date of the hearing, and I will keep the board apprised, absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. It is burned in my forehead, Mr. Cox, thank you.
If no other questions, I will call the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Anything else, Mr. Attorney?
No, Madam Chairman, and thank you very much.
I've got to run to another meeting, so.
David, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad none
Thank
of
you,
you are getting paid by the.
Oh, that's signature page? Yes,
I'd rather
ma'am.
pay it by the hour than the pound.
There you go. Yes, Madam, Mrs. Flaherty, yeah.
Yeah, this page here, the state of Florida, this last page of that,
Yeah, resolution 2017-14,
yeah.
yes.
The last page was published for news press on, do we have to have?
Well,
a
that's gonna
date?
be, yeah, we have that date because that's the date we had before. That's the annual advertisement that you place in the newspaper where you outline your board meetings. And that was September 22nd, 2016.
Okay,
We'll insert that.
thank you.
And because the meeting of the 20th was advertised in that blanket annual notice of meetings. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have nothing further, Madam Chairman.
And there was one.
One item that Mr. Bloom and I discussed, and I thank you, Madam Chairman, for that.
Yeah.
Stephen, do you want to introduce the topic, or?
Sure, yeah, it's 4A, approval for meter loan modification. The meter loan, the last date per the current documents to be able to withdraw money for the loan is April 30th. Since we are still kind of walking through, the last steps on that, we felt it was important to modify the loan to allow another 90 days to be able to withdraw from that particular loan. So this is just a request to get approval from the board to proceed with that. In talking with the bank, they are on board with this. None of the other aspects of the loan or terms of the loan would change. And it would basically be like a one-page loan modification page that would get done.
And this isn't anything to do with dollar amount, it's just dates, extending the date that
Correct,
we can
yes.
withdraw funds.
Right, because you have, I believe there's a retainage that's still in question. And obviously, once that gets done, we want to be able to do a final withdrawal from the loan.
Yeah.
And this will just ensure that you have an additional 90 days to accomplish that.
And that starts when, Stephen?
It'll start, well, April 30th.
April
from 90
30th.
days from April 30th.
I'd make that motion to extend the loan by 90 days.
And authorize the chairman to sign, and also with Stephen's conversations, we had a conversation, if the issue of the retainage is not resolved after 90 days, we'll approach the bank, and they were comfortable with that. Is my recollection, Stephen?
They are comfortable, again, where it would start to have some issues or concerns with them if we start changing the amortization schedule, which I don't believe at this point we are
We don't
interested in
need to do
doing.
that.
So,
No.
it would really just be about the 90 days.
I'll make that motion revised.
I'll second it, but I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, my question is, actually indirectly with the meter loan. The meters are not finished, and this is why we have to extend this loan
No.
date? Is that what the problem is?
No.
No,
That's what I want to know,
No,
the
the
purpose. Okay.
There's a request for payment of the retainage under the contract with Four Line. A submittal was made last week by Four Line that we've not yet finalized our review. The monies to make that retainage payment, if it's to be made, are in that Iberia loan. So we need to extend the loan in order to have those funds available if the determination is made to make that payment, as
Okay.
opposed to coming out of any other fund of the district. Is that a fair statement, Steve?
Right, it just gives you the option to be able to, it doesn't mean you have to, if you were to decide to pay this retainage, you can, then pull it from the loan.
This is on the agenda, because we have a timing issue. This is on the agenda for next Thursday's meeting?
Would the approval?
Well, it will be, it's not there yet because we haven't
Just-
finalized all the reviews.
Yes,
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
how
on.
about
We need to do-
yes.
Yeah,
We'll need to modify the agenda.
a thorough discussion of that.
Okay.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand. Is there a thorough discussion of the 90 days?
No, the
or-
No, no,
retainage.
the
Oh, okay.
retainage, paying the retainage.
Paying,
Yeah.
that's-
I have a question, Madam Chairman.
Go ahead.
Steve, since we haven't even installed all the meters, it seems to me that 90 days might be a little optimistic. Do you think maybe 180
It's a
would
separate
be a
issue.
more appropriate number?
It's a separate issue, I
I
think.
think, Mr. Guy, maybe I'll jump in and Chris and or Stephen can smack me upside the head. The meters that are yet to be installed, I think, are by US Water. They're
Yeah.
separate purchase order, if I'm not mistaken.
Separate issue. Yeah.
Not the Four Line. And the funds for US Water, they're coming out of the Iberia loan also or not?
Go ahead, I'll let.
Yeah,
Good
the
question.
funds for those remaining meters, we did charge to the meter replacement program and also the labor cost to US Water for those remaining meters. And we're really down to about a dozen of them left. And if they don't get them finished pretty soon, we're just gonna go out and install them ourselves or have a contractor do the last few of them.
So 90 days is good for your perspective,
Yes,
Chris?
sir.
Yeah, I agree. I think 90 is more than enough.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Any other questions? Okay, I will call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All righty. Any supervisor comments? Mr.
I
Taylor.
just, again, like to thank Stephen, Esty, Liz and Russ, Tony. This was a lot of work. It was one heck of a lot of work. So, anyway, appreciate.
Thank you.
Mr. Guy?
I have nothing.
Ms. Flaherty?
I do.
Okay.
All right, I want to bring it to the board because we met with the lands architect, and we want to change the scope and the focus of, and do we have to come to the board for approval for that? We want to make it a capital fund, so can that be put on the agenda then for next time around?
I don't know if we can get it on the 4th or not.
Right, we missed
Yeah.
Oh, we missed that one,
It'd
okay.
be the second meeting in May.
Okay, that's fine, just so that we can bring it, change what we planned.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I have nothing, so with that, I will adjourn this meeting.
Thank you, Madam
Thank
Clerk.
you.
Thank you, members of the board. Thank you.